and welcome to a brand new episode of The Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we will be focusing on the participation of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the second U.S.-African Summit or the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, and the importance of the invitation to Egypt and the other African countries, as well as the meetings that took place between His Excellency President al-Sisi and the World Bank President, for example, the other leaders from all over the world, more specifically from Libya, from Africa, the importance of such a summit and the hoped for applicable meetings, the meetings that took place. How can the results be applied in the future of those meetings and the discussions that took place over the 3 days that took place in the past week? And I'm honored to be shedding more light on this important topic with my dear guest for tonight, Engineer Hassan Shaaban, the political, economic and agricultural expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Anytime. First of all, we'll be starting straight away with the top story from today, and it comes from the local level as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Sunday met Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, Minister of Supply Ali Musolhi, and the Major General of the Armed Forces National Service Projects, Walid Abul Magd. President al-Sisi was updated on the government's efforts for providing the strategic food commodities for the citizens nationwide, where he urged maintaining the state strategic reserve of the staple food commodities and aggravating the value added for the commodities stored at the silos, with the aim of ensuring the stability of food security through meeting the needs of the citizens. The President also followed up on the developments of the current wheat cultivation season, where he directed determining the price of wheat supplies in order to achieve a profitable economic yield for the farmers and support increasing the amounts of the supplied wheat. The head of state also reviewed the pace of work at the nitrogenous fertilizers complex in Al Ain Al Sukhna, the school feeding project and the plasma collection complex project. Engineer Hassan Shaaban, before heading to the main topic of the daily debate for tonight, the meeting that took place between President al-Sisi, Prime Minister Madbouli, the Minister of Supply Ali Musolhi, as well as other high-level dignitaries at the same level. What is the importance of focusing on the wheat, for example, because we can see the conflict that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine.
Yes.
It is affecting the whole world, and more specifically in Egypt in this field.
Actually, this reflects the how important the government is caring about the coming few months till this war between Russia and Ukraine actually is over. We're going to have a plan, and the next 6 months is very important for us because by then this is the harvest time for wheat.
Yes.
And unless we are fully aware of the area that we cultivated, we will not be able to estimate the reserves of our supplies. So it's very important for us to have a fair actually prices for the farmers to encourage them to grow wheat. Actually, I hope that the government will adopt modern methods to contract with the farmers ahead of time, ahead of harvest time.
Yes.
Maybe give in the future, maybe I don't know if this didn't happen this year, but to give the wheat, the seeds ahead of time and sign contracts with the farmers close to the international prices, deducting the ocean freight and the transportation between ports and the silos. The idea is not to penalize the farmers like somebody was actually promoting the idea of penalizing farmers if they do not supply the crops to the government. I think if we have a fair price, this will encourage the farmers to supply the wheat actually in due time.
As the former vice president of the Farmer Syndicate, we will be taking both sides, the side of the farmers and the side of the government. We'll be starting with the government. How did you see the measures taken by the government throughout the conflict that we have seen ever since February between Ukraine and Russia in this field in specific? Is it a good measure?
To a certain extent, yes. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball to read the future, but we managed to predict a lot of the problems that we are facing and found solutions for it. But again, I hope that the government will actually get closer to the farmer and solve the problems that the farmer is facing today. Also, we're going to have to encourage our research institutes to come up with seeds that can cope with the environmental changes that are taking place. You've noticed that this autumn, actually, weather was a little bit different from the regular weather that we are familiar with in autumn. Yes. The temperature is a little bit higher than the regular temperature, and this affects the growth of wheat, by the way. Wheat is a crop for, suitable for cold places, cold yes. areas. I think our research centers should actually get busy and try to find seeds that can cope with the environmental changes, because sooner or later we're going to face that actually.
On the other hand, the side of the farmers. What is the fair price that you have mentioned previously, first of all? And do you think that if they get this fair price, they would be preferring to provide to the government?
Definitely, definitely. We're going to have, I think if we utilize and manage the land and the water, yes. I mean, and have a good formula, definitely the farmers will be encouraged to grow wheat actually, instead of crops that stays for a short time in the field. Let me put it this way. The problem with wheat that it stays almost 6 months, half of the year, occupying the farmer's field.
That's a long time.
It's a very long time. While actually other crops, you could grow 2-3 crops in the same duration. So actually we have to consider that the wheat actually occupies the land longer. It doesn't really take, it's not thirsty for water. Actually, wheat is a plant that doesn't really require a lot of water, but again, it requires cold climate and protection from disease actually. But generally speaking, if we reach a price attractive to the farmer and try to control the price of fertilizer, the urea and nitrates, because the prices of fertilizers are going up. I think we could reach a good price. Also, I think the government is encouraging farmers to change from regular irrigation systems to modern irrigation systems. Yes. So I would urge the government to reconsider the taxes applied in the sales of the equipment that is used to divert from regular irrigation to modern irrigation, drippers and hoses and so forth. There is a 14% taxes being charged right now. This will not encourage the farmers to shift from the regular irrigation to modern irrigation. I would urge also, we have to consider again the price of electricity for the farmers. We have to differentiate between the electricity used for the purpose of agriculture, and electricity used for shops and houses. The prices of electricity is a little bit, high for the farmers, and I hope the government soon will reconsider.
So those were the couple of problems facing the farmers. So we have taken the side of the farmers and the government. At the same time, we'll be heading to the main topic for the daily debate for tonight, which is the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, the participation of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the summit. And one of the statements made by President al-Sisi that the West or the U.S. could be alleviating the debt burdens on the afflicted nations. We'll be having more details in the upcoming report about the statements of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi throughout his participation in the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington.
Third and final day of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi urged the U.S. to invest in alleviating debt burdens on the most afflicted countries, noting that the debt rate has reached serious levels exceeding 250% of their revenues. The president made his speech during a leaders' session held on the sidelines of the summit under the title Promoting Food Security and Food Systems Resilience. During his speech, President al-Sisi stressed that food and water security are closely linked and, in Egypt's case, is a matter of national security. Guaranteeing food and water security necessitates political will to formulate a legal framework to manage cooperation among the countries that share the water resources in order to achieve development without inflicting any harm. Last week, in a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the sidelines of the summit, President al-Sisi reiterated the necessity of reaching a legally binding deal on the rules of filling and operating the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam GERD. President al-Sisi told Blinken that such a deal would preserve the water security of Egypt and the flow of the Nile River. He also stressed that the most recent UN Climate Change Forum, COP27, hosted by Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh, highlighted the pressing intersection of climate change with food security. President al-Sisi emphasized that more than a third of those who are food insecure are in Africa. The president also proposed that the African continent needs a fully fledged international project to develop its infrastructure. Such a project, whose aim is to develop a comprehensive vision for Africa's infrastructure, requires mobilizing resources in support from major countries and global development experts. President al-Sisi's speech spotlighted Egypt's vision to enhance food security in Africa, focusing on the importance of intensifying agricultural investments in order to develop the continent's production and storage capacities with modern technologies. He added that the African Free Trade Agreement provides a framework that could enhance integration among the countries of the continent. He also voiced his hope that major countries could help Africa by investing in its infrastructure and agricultural projects. The African Union, AU, and France cooperated to launch the Food and Agriculture Resilience Mission Farm Initiative for food security in the most vulnerable countries. President al-Sisi also urged the necessity African countries use the innovative Africa Exchange Trade Platform, ATEX, and boost digital trade in critical commodities under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. He again voiced Egypt's readiness to share its expertise on food security, citing the country's initiative to cultivate an additional 1.5 million fadans and the Silos National Project to double its grain storage capacity.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Engineer Hassan Shaaban, as we did see in the past report, the visit of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Washington. How do you see the ties nowadays between Egypt and the U.S. and more generally between the United States and Africa?
if we start with the relations between the U.S. and Egypt,
Yes.
actually, I think it's coming back to the right path, actually. Since the peace agreement that the U.S. adopted some time ago, many moons ago, between Egypt and Israel, the U.S. was there, very present in the area, and now the U.S. is regaining its position in the area. The principles that we all believed in the early 50s and late 40s after the Second World War, that the U.S. is a guardian for peace, justice, and democracy, freedom. All of this is coming back. I think the U.S. is reconsidering the style that they used to adopt in the last couple of decades. Yes. I don't think that the results in certain areas or certain countries were fruitful. I think we're going to see a lot of changes, and the U.S. that we used to know is coming back to the image and the principles that we knew. I think Egypt and the U.S. will enjoy excellent relations, coordination, strategic planning, and I think it's going to be a completely different era, and we're going to see very fast results, because the problems in the area and the instability of certain countries in the area is not really going to help development. So we're going to have to resolve all the instabilities in the areas so we can actually have the development plans that we have. Libya, Iraq, Yemen, all of these countries require a very fast move to cool off the situation in these areas. The U.S. and Egypt, I'm optimistic, and I think from what I've seen in the visit for His Excellency the President Sisi to the U.S., I think very soon we're going to see very positive results for this visit. If we go to the other direction, the U.S. relationship with Africa, I think the priorities of the U.S. is changing now, because Africa was not on the priority list actually for a number of decades actually, and this gave a chance to competitors of the U.S. to be there and offer their help. Of course, the competition to offer help is in the benefit of Africa. Africa is a victim continent actually, and I think it's about time for Europe and the U.S. To reconsider the style of politics that they were dealing with Africa with. Anyway, I think the U.S. have a good plan to participate in the development of a lot of the countries in Africa. I think within a few years we're going to see very fruitful results, because Africa is a very promising, though it went through a very hectic trip during the foreign occupation, European countries that occupied Africa. But again, Africa is still a continent that have a lot of resources, and I think it is a good chance for the U.S. to help Africa, get to the point that most of the countries actually around the world have reached, like in the Far East and so forth. Hopefully, Egypt will be able to assist the U.S. in playing this role. Yes. I hope sincerely that the U.S. will be able to resolve the problems of the continent, and on the top of the list, of course, the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia on the Renaissance Dam. Yes. I think with the technology and the capabilities of the U.S. to find solutions for the problems, I hope to see like all the Nile Basin countries, starting Congo, all the way to the Mediterranean, be as controlled by, say, a satellite that can actually control all the water resources in the area, all the dams, all the reservoirs, all the flow in all the rivers. Starting in Congo, they're constructing a huge dam right now, the Super Inga dam. This dam will be able to produce electricity that can provide Africa with the electricity required for the whole of Africa. Of course, right now, Africa is not really ready for that, so I think some of this electricity will be exported to Europe. Also, the renewable energy. This is an item that we should concentrate on, because nobody has the sun that Africa has, actually. I think with the solar energy that we could generate in the south of the desert, in all the countries, the Niger and Mali, Burkina Faso, all the way to Chad and Egypt, actually, Libya and Chad. All of these countries are very capable of, constructing solar farms like the Bimban solar farm that in Aswan that we had. But I'm hoping that we have a mega project in all these countries, actually, and export the produced electricity to Europe, because a lot of the countries in Europe are banning the use of nuclear power or nuclear energy to produce electricity. So I think we're going to face a situation where it's going to be a win-win situation. Yes. A lot of investments could come. I think it's about time for the U.S. not to be late to invest in this. If the competition between the U.S. and China will take place on the African ground, good for Africa. The African countries benefit from this. But again, it's better late than never.
You think that, as you mentioned, the competition between the U.S. and Africa is...
And China.
The U.S. and China, I'm sorry. As we did see in the past couple of years, this is the second summit of the U.S. Africa, and we have seen China in the past years focusing on Africa, focusing on the potentials of Africa. And even in the past week, we have seen China having contacts with Saudi Arabia, the GCC, the Arab states, including Egypt and Tunisia. Do you think that these steps taken by China is the main coordinator for the U.S. or the main reason for the U.S. to be focusing on Africa once again, to be focusing on the Arab world once again in terms of potential and investments?
Well, definitely. Africa will be the competition ground, yes, between China and the U.S. And this is, of course, very beneficial to the African countries. In the light of we all really loved the slogans that the U.S. Actually announced after the Second World War, And I hope that we regain all of these slogans again and see it in Africa. When Egypt was heading the African Union, there was a program to try to just defeat the terrorist activities in Africa. Yes. There was a program of silence of guns, actually. And I think very soon we could see security, and because you really require security as a first step to develop. So I think we're going to see a boom in Africa very soon. Hopefully, the infrastructures that we are witnessing in our country will connect us somehow to the depth of Africa, actually. I would love to see the Alexandria-Cape Town highway constructed, because this will help Egypt export its goods, actually. Mm-hmm. As a farmer, because I cannot really escape away from being a farmer, yes. I think the countries in Africa will suffer for some time till they have cold storage facilities. Mm. And this will give an excellent chance to the canned food for Egypt to export it to African countries, yes. In West Africa, mm-hmm. and in the east part of Africa. So actually, till Africa develops and have cold storage facilities, Egypt will have an excellent market. This will improve the agriculture situation in Egypt, yes. Because actually I'm pro industries that depends on crops. We have the raw material and locally, yes. And I think if we connect it to the other countries, this will be very beneficial. Hopefully, we could reach agreements with countries like Libya. Yes. Libya enjoys an agreement with Italy and Greece on tomato sauce, for instance. We, as a farmer, I urge our government to have a similar agreement to reduce or actually remove the customs taxes completely to export such a good to Libya, for instance. We need to work hard, activate COMESA. All of these agreements will be very beneficial to Egypt in the light of the interest that the U.S. is showing in the area.
Yes, Engineer Hassan Shaaban, we will be focusing as well on the Egyptian-Libyan relations, because during the summit, President Al-Sisi had a meeting with right. Mohammed Al-Menfi, the yes. head of the Presidential Council for Libya. But I will be having more details in the upcoming report about the statements made by the American businessmen, especially in the private sector or the business sector of the United States, and the possible investments that could be pumped into Egypt in the near future. The statements made to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during his participation in the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington. So stay tuned.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi attended an open dialogue with representatives of the U.S. business sector who expressed interest in working in Egypt and expanding their existing projects. The dialogue took place in honor of President al-Sisi from the American Chamber of Commerce to mark the 100th anniversary of establishing ties between Egypt and the United States on the sidelines of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington. President al-Sisi expressed his appreciation of Egypt's strategic ties with the United States and welcomed the growing activities of U.S. companies operating in Egypt. The president also affirmed Egypt's keenness to communicate with investors to resolve problems and obstacles that might face them. He also expressed his appreciation for the role played by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Egypt-U.S. Business Council in backing economic and trade relations between Egypt and the United States. The president also stressed the importance of the private sector's role in the country as an engine of growth through increasing investments and transferring knowledge and expertise to serve the common interests of the two countries. President Sisi also underlined the fruitful discussions with a number of U.S. officials that focused on ways to develop economic cooperation, beef up the volume of trade exchange between the two countries, and increase U.S. companies' investments in Egypt. President Sisi emphasized during the progress made in structural economic reforms and establishing the legislative and institutional structure to attract more FDIs to Egypt. The attendees praised Egypt's economic reforms and lauded the major national projects being implemented in the country that have made Egypt an international economic hub, praising the resilience shown by the Egyptian economy in the face of the successive global crises, including COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian-Ukrainian war. They also expressed keenness on boosting U.S. investments in Egypt in the upcoming period, particularly in the health, technology, tourism, and renewable energy sectors. President Sisi also asserted that Egypt intends to continue reform and development efforts with the view to implementing the Sustainable Development Strategy, Egypt Vision 2030.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. Engineer Hassan Shaaban, as we did see in the report, the bilateral ties between Egypt and the U.S. we have spoken of in the first part of the program. How do you see the Egyptian-African relations nowadays? Because we did see the meeting between President Sisi and the Libyan head of the Presidential Council, Mohammed al-Menfi, and the statements made by His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Saudi Arabia during the China-Arab World Summit, and in the United States about the Ethiopian Grand Dam. How do you see the importance of raising the issue and speaking about the issue for the powers like China and the United States to be meddling in it?
One can see definitely that the foreign policy that Egypt is following right now is a mature policy. Yes. We play politics in the right way. We know what to do, what to say, and hopefully Egypt could play a very positive role in the future, because we are geared. We have excellent relations with a lot of parties that are in conflict, like Ukraine, like Russia. Even we have a model for our conflict with Ethiopia, actually.
Yes.
The Ethiopians are our brothers, actually. And I think if we are wise enough and we could convince our brothers in the Gulf to invest in projects in Ethiopia, Ethiopia wastes actually about 400 billion cubic meters of water. They seep, this water seeps to the Gulf of Aden. And if we manage to control and preserve this amount of water, the area will benefit from this. Our brothers in the Gulf could have some of the share, of course, if they actually finance projects in this area. Also, in Egypt, we will increase our share of water. I hope that the philosophy of solving problems will change, because I think Africa have matured. Egypt have a lot of experience in meddling with problems, and I think we will be able to utilize the present situation to become closer to our brothers in the south, Sudan, Ethiopia, Congo, I would love to see this area as a hub for food in the future. Also, Egypt could lead, a lot of countries in modernizing the IT programs that they have, like
Yes.
what we're doing right now. I think we could play a very positive role in Libya, and hopefully within few months, our brothers in Libya will have the elections that they are looking forward
Yes.
to have.
Yes, Engineer Hassan Shaaban, the political, the economic and the agricultural expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight
Thank you.
on the Daily Debate.
Thank you.
And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. I will be leaving you, however, with the presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the past week. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi receives Mr. Patrice Cain, the chairman and CEO of the French Thales Group. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets with Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sameh Shoukry. The meeting tackled the Minister of Foreign Affairs' presentation of the first executive report on the National Strategy for Human Rights. President al-Sisi receives Mrs. Crystal Hedman, the Executive Director of Orange International Group for Communications. The Egyptian community in Washington, D.C. welcomes President al-Sisi upon His Excellency's arrival in the United States to participate in the events of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets with a number of Republican leaders in the U.S. Senate at His Excellency's residence in Washington, D.C. President al-Sisi meets with members of Friends of Egypt Group in the U.S. Congress from both the Republican and Democratic parties. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken. President al-Sisi meets at the Pentagon headquarters in Washington, D.C. with U.S. Secretary of Defense, Mr. Lloyd Austin. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi attends a dinner banquet at the White House held for the African leaders taking part in the U.S.-African Leaders Summits at the invitation of U.S. President Joe Biden. President al-Sisi registers a word in the Pentagon's Roll of Honor. President al-Sisi receives at His Excellency's residence in Washington, D.C. a number of leaders of the U.S. Jewish organizations. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets with the chairman of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mr. Mohammed al-Manfi, on the sidelines of the events of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. President al-Sisi meets in Washington, D.C. with member of the U.S. Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi takes part in the Food Security and Food Systems Safeguarding session held at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi attends a dinner banquet held by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. in honor of His Excellency on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the establishment of U.S.-Egypt diplomatic relations. President al-Sisi receives at His Excellency's residence in Washington, D.C. Mr. David Malpass, President of the World Bank. President al-Sisi receives at His Excellency's residence in Washington, D.C., U.S. National Security Advisor, Mr. Jake Sullivan. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held a phone call with King Abdullah II bin al-Hussein, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.